Now I have the full original story. Let me write a completely new story following the same formula. I need to write a 5,000 word story. In English, with the following formula, female narrator. 25到35. Credible background, 3-act structure. Set up conflict resolution. Someone unexpected reveals the betrayal. Money, motive, clear from the start. Quiet controlled protagonist villain, faces real consequences. Fix plot holes from the original, explain how person knew. Clearer method of poisoning, tampering. I'm 31 years old. And I've spent the last 6 years working as a forensic accountant for a federal contractor in Denver. Most people hear that and picture someone buried under spreadsheets in a gray cubicle. They're not wrong about the spreadsheets. But the job taught me something most people learn too late. Money doesn't lie. And the people trying to steal it always leave a trail. 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's estate. She passed quietly on a Tuesday morning in late November. And by the time her attorney finished reading the trust documents, the number on the page was $3. 4 millions. Not a lottery jackpot. Not a tech windfall. Just 60 years of a woman who grew up with nothing. Bought land in Wyoming when nobody wanted it. And never once told anyone what she was worth. I knew about the inheritance. My brother did not. Or so I thought. His name is Derek. He's 35. The kind of charming that only works on people who haven't known him long. We grew up in the same house. Went to the same school for 3 years before our parents divorced, and I moved to Colorado with our mother. We stayed in loose contact. Birthday texts. The occasional call at Christmas. A visit every couple of years when someone felt obligated. I wouldn't have called us close. But I wouldn't have called us enemies either. That was my mistake. The day I drove to Cheyenne to meet with the estate attorney, I made a decision I thought was generous. I called Derek and told him I'd like to sit down with him before the estate was finalized. I said I wanted to make sure the family was taken care of. He said all the right things. Of course. I really appreciate that. It means a lot to me. Ray. His voice was warm in a way I hadn't heard since we were teenagers. Before the debt and the failed businesses and the years of borrowing money from relatives who stopped answering his calls, we agreed to meet for dinner that Saturday at a restaurant called Hennessy's in the Cherry Creek neighborhood of Denver. Upscale without being theatrical. The kind of place with linen napkins, a long wine list, and staff who move quietly. I got there first. I was on my second glass of water when Derek arrived with his girlfriend, Lorraine. I'd met her twice before. Late 20s. Pleasant enough. Always slightly watching. They settled in across from me. And Derek ordered a bottle of wine without asking me if I wanted any. I didn't say anything. The gesture told me enough. We made small talk through the appetizers. He asked about my job, but not in a way that required listening to the answer. Lauren kept redirecting the conversation toward the estate, toward Grandma Ruth's property, toward timelines. She was doing the steering while Derek smiled. I noticed. I didn't show that I noticed. The entrees arrived and Derek finally said it plainly, which I respected more than I expected to. I just want to make sure I'm not cut out of this. Ray. Ruth always said she'd take care of us equally. I've been going through a rough patch. And this could really change things for me. His eyes were steady. His hands were relaxed on the table. It was a performance. And not a bad one. I told him I hadn't made any decisions yet. That I wanted to talk to the attorney again before doing anything. He nodded slowly and picked up his fork. And Lauren topped off her wine. What happened next? I almost missed. I'd excused myself to take a call in the lobby from my boss. And when I came back, something felt different. Not visibly different. Just the way a room feels when someone has moved something and put it back in almost the right place. Derek was laughing at something on his phone. Lauren was cutting her steak. My water glass was slightly closer to his side of the table than I'd left it. I sat back down and reached for it slowly. And that's when the woman from the table behind us leaned forward. She was maybe 60. Silver hair, wearing a blazer with a small enamel pin on the lapel. Her voice was barely above a murmur, and she was speaking only to me. "I'm sorry to intrude, but while you were up?" The woman across from you opened her bag, took something out, and put it in your glass. I watched the whole thing. I didn't know whether to say something, but I couldn't not. She held my gaze for a second, then sat back and returned to her own dinner as though she'd commented on the weather. I didn't look at Derek. I didn't look at Lauren. I wrapped both hands around the base of my glass and turned it once. Slowly, like I was reading the label on a bottle. Then I set it down and picked up my fork and continued eating. My pulse was steady. That surprised me more than what the woman had said. I'd spent 6 years working financial fraud investigations. I'd sat across tables from people who'd stolen pension funds from retirees and explained it with the same relaxed expression Derek was wearing right now. I understood, in a clinical way, that I was looking at someone who had made a calculation, the kind of calculation that requires a person to stop thinking of you as a person entirely. I finished dinner. I laughed at 2 of Derek's jokes. I split the check evenly when the bill arrived, which seemed to catch him slightly off guard. When we said goodbye outside, he hugged me, and I let him. His jacket smelled like cedar and something sharper beneath it. Lauren gave me a quick squeeze and said, "So great to see you. We'll talk soon." Her eyes were already past my shoulder. I walked to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and exhaled for the first time since the woman had leaned forward. Then I opened my glove compartment and took out 2 evidence bags I'd had in there for years, left over from a consulting job that required field collection kits. I keep them out of habit the way some people keep umbrellas. I pulled out a fresh pair of nitrile gloves, went back into the restaurant, and asked the busser if I could have the glass from my table before they cleared it. He looked confused, but handed it over. I thanked him and sealed it in the bag. Then I went back to my car and sat quietly for a while, looking at the Denver skyline through the windshield. The next morning, I called a contact named Philip, who runs an independent forensic lab on the east side of town. He owes me a professional favor from a case 3 years ago where my analysis saved his client from a wrongful conviction. I drove the sealed glass over at 8 in the morning. He logged it, maintained chain of custody, and told me he'd have preliminary results within 4 hours. While I waited, I went back to my apartment and opened my laptop. I pulled up the property filings on Grandma Ruth's Wyoming land. Then I searched Derek's name in the Colorado Business Registry and the county court database. What I found there was the kind of paperwork that tells a story without editorializing. 2 failed LLCs, both dissolved within 18 months. A civil judgment for unpaid rent, a personal loan default with a credit union in Aurora, and, filed 6 weeks ago, a name change on a checking account that had been opened in a trust I didn't recognize. I sat back and thought about the phone call where I'd told him about the inheritance. I'd said $3, $4 million out loud. I'd said it like it was good news, like I was sharing something that might help both of us. Philip called me back at 1217. "Alright," he said, and I knew from the tone that I wasn't wrong. "There's a compound in here I don't see very often. Chlorpromazine. It's an antipsychotic, but at high doses it causes severe sedation, dangerously low blood pressure, and in someone with no tolerance and no physician oversight, it can cause respiratory suppression." "Did you drink any of this?" I told him no. "Good," he said, "because the concentration in here is significant. Whoever put this in a social drink was not adding a little extra relaxation to the evening. This is a dosage that would have been noticed by a paramedic." I asked him to print the full report, sign it, and document the chain of custody. He said he'd have it ready within the hour. He drove to pick it up. On the way back, I stopped at a coffee shop and sat at a corner table and did what I've learned to do in every complicated investigation. I wrote down everything I knew in the order I knew it. Then I wrote down every gap. And then I started filling the gaps. The woman at the dinner table had seen Lauren open her bag and put something into my glass while I was in the lobby. That explained the access. Lauren was positioned directly across from my glass. Derek had been sitting beside me. Not across. So Lauren had the angle. She'd had approximately 3 to 4 minutes while I was on the phone. That was enough. The motive was clear. Derek had creditors, failed businesses, and no obvious path to income. The estate was worth $3. 4 millions. If I was incapacitated or died before the trust was finalized, the distribution would revert to the secondary beneficiaries named in Grandma Ruth's documents. Derek was listed as a secondary beneficiary. I hadn't been paying attention to that detail. I was paying attention to it now. The premeditation troubled me more than the act itself. That's something I've noticed in fraud cases. It's not the betrayal that stays with you. It's the timeline. The calculation that must have happened before that dinner. In some quiet conversation between Derek and Lauren, where my life was reduced to an obstacle with a dollar amount attached to it, I called a woman named Constance, who is one of the best civil litigation attorneys in Colorado, and who I met when we were both working a case involving a family trust being drained by a sibling. She'd handled the legal strategy. I'd handled the forensic accounting. We'd stayed in contact. I told her what had happened. I gave her the facts in sequence. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then said, "You have forensic lab results with chain of custody documentation, a corroborating eyewitness from a public restaurant, and a documented financial motive. Do you want this criminal or civil?" I told her I wanted it controlled. She understood immediately. Then we don't go public yet. We build the case privately. We secure the estate. And we present them with a choice. If they take the choice, they disappear. If they don't take the choice, the DA gets a complete package, and they lose the option. I asked her how long that would take. She said 2 weeks. Possibly 3. I said that was fine. The next 2 weeks moved the way investigations always move when you know what you're looking for. Constance hired a private investigator to trace the financial connections between Derek, Lauren, and the unknown trust that had appeared in the county filings. What that investigator found was thorough and ugly. Derek had taken out a private loan 4 months ago, using Grandma Ruth's Wyoming land as collateral. Based on documents that forged my grandmother's signature, the loan was for $200,000. It had already been partially spent. The lender was a private LLC based in Nevada, with a history of predatory lending practices. Lauren had a notary license. The investigator found records showing she'd notarized 3 documents in the past year that bore signatures we could not verify, including 1 real estate document and 1 power of attorney form that had never been filed but had been printed from a template. She was not a criminal mastermind. She was a person who had convinced herself that none of this would have consequences. The eyewitness was the detail that mattered most. Constance had reached out to her through the restaurant, which had a reservation under her name. Her name was Margaret, and she was a retired pharmacist who had recognized the distinctive small glass vial that Lauren had used. The same style that pharmacies use for liquid compounded medications. She had also taken a photograph on her phone during the incident, without Derek or Lauren noticing. She hadn't mentioned the photograph when she'd leaned forward and spoken to me. But when Constance contacted her, she provided it immediately. The image was clear. Lauren's hand. My glass. The vial. Time-stamped. Margaret signed a sworn affidavit the following Tuesday. She drove herself to Constance's office and sat at the conference table and answered every question with the precision of someone who had spent a career, being careful about accuracy. When she was done, she shook my hand and said, "Nobody should have to be afraid of their own family at the dinner table." I thanked her. I meant it fully. 2 days before we were scheduled to present everything to Derek and Lauren. I drove to the estate attorney's office and had the trust documents amended. The charitable foundation I'd been planning to establish for the past year was formalized in a single afternoon. Grandma Ruth's Wyoming land was transferred into it as the primary asset. The foundation's mission was straightforward scholarships for first-generation college students from Wyoming and rural Colorado, with preference given to students pursuing degrees in accounting, law, and public administration. It was what she would have wanted, though she never said so, in those words. She said it in the way she lived. Derek and Lauren were no longer beneficiaries of anything. There was nothing left to take. We scheduled the meeting for a Thursday morning at Constance's office in lower downtown Denver. I called Derek the day before and told him I wanted to go over the preliminary trust paperwork before anything was finalized, that I needed him to sign a few documents for the record. He said he'd be there. His voice had the particular warmth of a person who believes they are close to getting what they want. They arrived 7 minutes early, which surprised me. Derek was wearing a jacket I'd never seen before. Charcoal gray. The kind of jacket that costs money. Lauren had her hair down. They looked like people who had spent the morning getting ready for something they'd been planning for a while. Constance opened the meeting with a brief administrative overview. Trust structure. Document categories. Process timeline. Her voice was steady and bureaucratic, in a way that put people at ease, which was entirely deliberate. She set a stack of folders in the center of the table. Derek leaned forward slightly. Lauren kept her hands folded. The first folder Constance opened contained the forensic lab report. She placed it in front of them without commentary and gave them time to read the header. Chlorpromazine. Concentration. Sample source. Date. Chain of custody signatures. Lauren's hands unfolded. Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This is a certified laboratory analysis of a sample collected from the restaurant where you both had dinner with my client on Saturday, the 14th. Constance said. The sample was collected under documented chain of custody. The lab director and witnessing technician have both signed sworn statements. The second folder contained Margaret's affidavit and the photograph. I watched Lauren look at the photograph for a long time. The image was unambiguous. She didn't say anything. The individual who provided this statement is a licensed pharmacist with 32 years of professional experience. Constance continued. She recognized the vial type on site. Her affidavit describes, in precise detail, what she observed and when. The third folder contained the investigator's report, the forged loan documents, the traced financial transfers, the notarized paperwork with signatures that couldn't be verified, the history of the private lender, the partial spending of the $200,000 against collateral my grandmother never agreed to. Derek put his hand flat on the table. I want to talk to an attorney. You're welcome to do that, Constance said without a pause. If you choose to involve your own attorney before making a decision today, the materials in these folders will be delivered to the Denver District Attorney's Office within 48 hours. The forensic evidence, the eyewitness documentation, and the financial fraud findings will be presented as a complete package. That package will also include a timeline showing the loan was initiated 4 months after your sister notified you of the inheritance, which establishes premeditation. She paused. That's your option if you'd like to call an attorney. I want to be clear about what that option involves. He didn't pick up his phone. Constance continued. There is a second option. You and Ms. Lauren signed the agreement in the final folder. In that agreement, you acknowledge the existence of this evidence and waive all current and future claims to Rachel's estate, the trust, the foundation, and all associated assets. You agree to repay the fraudulent loan in full within 90 days. And you agree to have no further contact with Rachel or her representatives. In exchange, the materials in these folders are held in sealed escrow. They will be submitted to law enforcement only if you violate the terms of the agreement. She set a pen on top of the final folder and left it there. The room was quiet. I could hear the faint sound of traffic from the street below, and the ventilation system in the ceiling, and the specific silence of two people calculating how bad their options were. Lauren spoke first. "This isn't fair." Her voice was tight but controlled. I looked at her directly for the first time since they'd arrived. "You put a sedative in my water glass at dinner," I said. That's where fair ended. She looked away. Derek picked up the pen. He signed without reading through the document in full, which told me everything about how thoroughly he understood his situation. Then he slid the pen to Lauren. She held it for a moment without moving, her eyes somewhere on the middle distance. And then she signed beneath his name. The ink pressed dark into the paper. Constance collected both pages, clipped them, and placed them in her briefcase. She stood up. "We're finished here. The escrow will be confirmed in writing to both of you by end of business today. If you have questions about the terms of the agreement, you should consult an attorney." She said it without warmth, but not unkindly. "Just finished." Derek stood. He didn't look at me. Lauren straightened her jacket and picked up her bag. They walked to the door, and the assistant opened it, and they left without saying anything else. I stayed in the conference room for a few minutes after the door closed. Constance sat back down across from me and set her briefcase on the floor and said nothing, which was the right call. After a moment I said, "Is it supposed to feel like this?" She tilted her head slightly. "Like what I thought about it." Quiet. She nodded once. "That usually means it went correctly." I drove home and took a long walk through the neighborhood, through Cheeseman Park and past the rows of Victorian houses along the east side. The weather had turned cold and the trees were bare, and the light was flat and gray. I bought a coffee from a cart near the park entrance and carried it without drinking much of it and thought about Grandma Ruth. She had worked a night shift at a grocery store for 11 years. She had bought her first acre of Wyoming land with the money she'd saved from those years. And then she'd bought the second acre. And then the third. She never had a financial advisor. She never had a lawyer on retainer. She just made very simple decisions, consistently, over a very long time, and told almost nobody what she had. I had not been quiet enough with her inheritance. I'd made the mistake of assuming that a phone call to Derek was generosity rather than information sharing. That was a lesson I wouldn't need to learn twice. The foundation paperwork was finalized the following week. The first scholarship would be awarded in the spring. The Wyoming land was protected inside the trust structure in a way that would have required a court order to touch. Constance had been meticulous about the legal architecture, which I expected. I sent Margaret a handwritten note thanking her for what she'd done. She called me 2 days later to say she'd received it. We talked for about 20 minutes. Mostly about nothing in particular. The kind of conversation you have with someone after something serious is over, and you both need to remember that ordinary life is still the majority of things. She mentioned that she'd worked in pharmacy for decades and had seen a lot of ways people got hurt. She said she'd learned early that the ones who got hurt most were the ones who assumed the people closest to them were safe. I told her I was starting to understand that. She laughed. Not unkindly. "You're young. You've still got time to build walls that let the right people through." After I hung up, I sat with that for a while. I thought about the list of things I knew now that I hadn't known before. That the people who steal from family do it slowly, over months, with paperwork and planning. That the act at the dinner table was the end of a long process, not the beginning. That my grandmother's silence about her money had not been eccentricity. It had been strategy. I opened the foundation's management portal and looked at the scholarship applications that had started coming in. 17 so far. A girl from Laramie who wanted to study accounting. A boy from a small town outside of Pueblo, whose parents were both veterans. A woman in her 40s going back to school after leaving a difficult situation. Real names. Real histories. Real futures. That had nothing to do with what my brother had tried to do. I updated 3 of the application files and flagged 2 for the review committee. Then I closed the laptop and washed the coffee cups from the morning and stood at the window for a moment watching the street below. The city was doing what cities do. Indifferent and continuous. Full of people who had no idea what had happened 3 floors up in a conference room on a Thursday morning. I thought about Derek somewhere out there, and I found that I didn't feel much. Not anger. Not grief. Not the particular ache of disappointed love that I might have expected. Just a clean, factual understanding of what he was and what he wasn't. He was someone I'd grown up near, who had looked at my grandmother's legacy and seen a number instead of a person, and who had made a choice in a restaurant that closed every door between us permanently. The foundation would open those doors somewhere else. Not for him. For 17 people in Laramie and Pueblo and wherever else, who hadn't done anything yet except decide they wanted something better. That seemed like the right place to put the money. That seemed like exactly what Grandma Ruth would have done.